The Kabbalistic meal or a meal is one of the central points that connects people. We know from history when grown-ups want to sit together around a table and eat food together, it symbolizes trust, closeness, connection. And so the first question is kind of general, but still, what's the root, the spiritual root of a meal? Dr. Laitman, well, a meal altogether is a very central, important action. Even animals that herd together, then it talks about, it shows a certain closeness between them, trust. All the more people that are much more cunning and further away from each other than animals are. If they reach a state where they sit together around the table, or invite each other, or both of them are putting this meal together, it shows that they have at least a temporary intention of somehow to come closer, to near each other, and therefore in all cultures, among all nations, a meal is a sort of connection between people. 2, 3, could be 1,000, doesn't matter how many. On the one hand. On the other hand, this is something that we're familiar with from our Kabbalistic sources, that whenever we're talking about nearing, connection, something gladdening, or not even that gladdening, but something festive, could be meaningful in short, then there is always a meal. A meal is actually, it always symbolizes in Kabbalah the reception of the upper light, fulfillment from the Creator, since He is the source of all that is living. Then any consumption of food is related to turning to the Creator. So there is a special plea to the Creator before the meal, during the meal, after the meal, in such a way that the connection between people, with everything that's included and surrounds the meal, for all of it to have good outcome, result. And therefore, we always make a meal when we're happy. And even when we're not that happy, we also nonetheless have a meal when we want to symbolize a special state, condition. But usually, a meal is something very pleasant, good, divine, godly. It is a meal for the sake of, or in name of the birth of a child, in name of his circumcision, like we see from history, in name of his 13th birthday, as it is in Jewish tradition, when he becomes a man, so to speak. Then, when he gets married or engaged, etc., etc. Meaning the meals accompany us in all of our good times. But even if a person is passing away or passed away, as a result of this, his relatives, they too sit together and have a meal. Of course, it's not festive or happy, but it is necessary in order to mark our respect for the deceased. So there are different kinds of meals, Shabbat meal, full moon, etc., etc., holidays, and it symbolizes special reception of abundance, light. Dr. Laitman, yes. Host, I know that there are certain elements that go with a Kabbalistic meal. First of all, the inner work itself, the intention, that's the most important thing, Dr. Laitman, because a meal symbolizes the reception of the upper fulfillment, abundance from the Creator. And therefore, when we consume, take in food, and we give thanks to the Creator, we welcome others that participate in it, what symbolizes us rising, each of us rising above their personal ego and nearing others, then we actually are realizing, implementing the most inner meaning of the meal. Host. Okay, now, many times I heard you tell about how your teacher gave meals, and it was traditional to eat olive oil, onion, and bread. It was so simple on purpose because he lived in times where people could allow themselves more. It was what? So that the food won't disturb your intention, or what? Dr. Laitman, it was very interesting. I used to come to study in the place where they taught Kabbalah in the evening, and always it was empty because they used to study in nighttime, etc., in the morning, and I used to come in the evening. It was on my way, about from 7 to 8 to 9, something like that. And in the kitchen, where I went to make myself a cup of coffee, I always found dishes, simple plastic Tupperware, and in them the remains of cut up onions, a little bit pepper, olive oil, and pieces of bread. Unfinished. Besides that, a few bottles of beer you always had, a few empty bottles of beer, and this is what remained. And it was interesting, because every time that I came, and afterwards I started coming every evening, it's the same. I found the same. It turns out that 5 or 6 students got together there. Those that still studied with Bala Sulam, the father of my teacher, they were all old. But old, what do you mean? They were all above 70. And they, every evening, this is what they did. That's how they finished their day, every evening. And I don't think that they needed any other kind of food. For them, it was enough. This food symbolized a meal. A day went by. They were grateful to the Creator, to each other, that we got together, that we studied together, that we attained the world, the universe, creation. And this is our gratitude to the Creator. This is how we finish our day. Host. But was there some kind of rationale, probably where it was, if it was very tasty dishes, then it would have been harder to keep your intention. So it was simple food on purpose? Dr. Laitman, I don't think that for them it would have been hard. It's the meal isn't that simple for that purpose. It's simply that you don't need more than that. That's it. That's the reason. It's not ordinary food, like when a person eats supper, dinner, lunch. No, they ended their day with it. It was kind of a symbolic meal where friends sit together, friends that live together for 50, 60 years. And this is how, by this common sitting together, uniting, they underlined their spiritual ascent. Host, the element of silence, of being quiet during meals, what is it for? Dr. Laitman, it's not about keeping quiet, but it's about the intention. When you eat with your friends on the spiritual path, for the spiritual path, then you have very strong inner intentions. How do you aspire for the goal with them? How do you unite? What bigger degree, higher degree or level between yourselves or from yourself to the Creator do you want to attain? Do you want to develop? And therefore, it's very important when people sit together quietly, immersed in themselves. Host, many times they sing melodies together. Dr. Laitman, right. There are certain songs, melodies, more correctly put, usually without words, that they sing together. Host. So these are all elements that help people to somehow come closer together, Dr. Laitman, internally, so that by their inner connection to rise to the Creator, to the Source. Host. In many of our source texts, it says about food, meals, sitting together, eating. It was always interesting. Obviously, it's all an allegory, what's written there, but they could have written about something else. But they write about it as if the simplest desire, so to speak. So Rambam, a great Kabbalist of the 12th century, he dedicated many of his works to meals, explaining that a person who sits at a meal, the best thing is to activate your five senses. You have to smell, there has to be some kind of music, there has to be, etc., for all of your five senses to participate. What is the meaning of this all? Dr. Laitman, well, some things are no longer used in our times, even though that, in the past they used to sniff tobacco. For the sense of smell, for example, it was very popular, specifically in that area where Rambam lived, for example, and they always carried it around with them and inhaled it. Host, what does it symbolize that you have to activate your five senses? It's hard to even imagine that it's an entire ceremony, as if. Dr. Laitman, right, it's really so that when I was later invited to connect with them, to them, for me it was really an entire ceremony. And I remember I prepared myself for it with such inner awe. Well, for me it was very meaningful. Host, from a spiritual point of view, food is the light of Chokhmah, and when a person chews, he as if divides all those desires into smaller parts, Dr. Laitman, and adds the intention to them. Host, and you said that the intention is already the light of Chasadim. In our world, what's interesting is that it's expressed in that when we chew, and the food mixes with the saliva. And can you explain about this process, Dr. Laitman? Physiologically, physiologically, I think that it's pretty clear how it happens, but spiritually wise, Dr. Laitman, host, to divide the desires, to mix it with the light of Chasadim, Dr. Laitman, when the upper light that represents, so to speak, the light of Chokhmah, of pleasure, of fulfillment, when it comes to a person, and it comes specifically when a person is ready to take it in accordance with the quality of the light bears with it the quality of love, connection, sometimes an anti-egoistic beginning. And if a person can react the same way to this anti-egoistic desire of his, then what happens is that a person by that opens the path to the upper light that can fulfill him. that can fulfill, and bring with it the feeling of the Creator, upper nature, to broaden the boundaries of our world, and a person starts feeling how he already appears in the upper world. Host Rambam wrote that it's necessary to thoroughly chew your food, otherwise it's harmful. We see that you can't immediately swallow food. For this we have teeth. He also once explained what that is. Dr. Laitman, of course, 32 teeth. These are the 32 as if parts that grind this food in order to sort it, in order to as if prepare it for swallowing, for taking it in. And here altogether you have to scrutinize mechanically how this works. What do we have? Lips, tongue, cheeks, how's the mouth built, all of these actions of ours. Host, it's analogous to spiritual actions, once you said, Dr. Laitman, precisely because of how it is in the spiritual world. We are built correspondingly. Our physical body is in accordance to the connection between the spiritual forces, and therefore receiving the upper light into our desires. This is how it has to be, and therefore our body is built in such a way that we will be able to eat food and to be able to advance to spiritual reception. Of course, our physical body is only a parallel to what happens in the spiritual world. There's no direct connection. Now, also, host, I know that we used to. There was also sacrifice. What does it mean to bring a sacrifice on the still vegetative animate levels? Dr. Laitman, it means that to bring an offering. Dr. Laitman, it means that from everything that you receive, you have to take a small portion and let's talk symbolically. And to symbolically put it aside, and either it was burned or, well, usually it was burned, meaning a small part of the meal, of the food was put aside, it was burned, by this showing that a man does not take it into his egoistic desire to receive, but into his altruistic desire of bestowal, that he takes in this food only in order to do good deeds. Host, is it possible to say that all of these forms, animate, vegetable, etc., these are different kinds of desires of ours, and when we bring an offering, it means that a person rises above these desires, overcomes them. These are different levels of the ego, Dr. Laitman. True. Host, and the highest is the animate level. If a person brings that as an offering, then it means that he can unite with other people above that egoistic level. Dr. Laitman, yes. Host, another thing we know from history is that in the temple there were big meals. It's not just that animals were slaughtered there, but afterwards there were big meals for several days. There were seminars. Dr. Laitman, yes, it was either for those who came to study, because the temple was also a place for studying, and people came there from everywhere in order to study. And besides that, a person, when he came to the temple, he had to bring an offering with him, and a part of that offering would be dedicated to for these dishes that were prepared, putting them on the general tables, and any person could come and take part in those meals. Host. So when a person sits, any group of people can sit together and have a meal. But we're saying that a person, he's sacrificing his time, he makes certain efforts, etc., etc. Dr. Laitman, well, it's not so much about sacrificing. In a meal takes part a person that with the help of this meal wants to spiritually ascend. Usually he'd eat by himself, but when he takes part in a meal, sitting with others, he understands what is he doing it for. Host. So it's tremendous in our work, Dr. Laitman. Yes, host. You said that in Middle Ages, different groups of Kabbalists, they used alcohol many times in order to relieve themselves a bit. Dr. Laitman, well, wine is very common with, meat, fish, bread mainly, salt, vegetables. So this all pertains to the meal. Host, is there we know that there are different foods. There's kosher and non-kosher food. Dr. Laitman, obviously. Here what we're talking about is kosher food, undoubtedly. Kosher, in translation, meaning fit, suitable. Suitable meaning what? Suitable for using this food that symbolizes the reception of the upper light, and therefore this food needs to be kosher, special meaning, specific, not just any food, and it has to be made in a specific way, etc. Meaning, what we're talking about here is already the next level of closeness between man and the Creator. Host. Well, for sheer interest, I read that there are certain forms of meat, kosher, different hosts. There has to be parsa, and these have to be special animals. Dr. Laitman, these are animals that have an inner cycle of metabolism, meaning those that swallow and at the same time they have a second cycle going on. It says that any food of theirs does not come from above down just so, but it comes with an intention. Host, yeah, once you said that, it symbolizes that there's the parsa that separates between reception and bestowal. It's interesting that such exalted spiritual concepts of inner work, Dr. Laitman, well, it's manifested on all levels, also on the animate level. Host, and Kabbalists saw how it happens in the branches and the roots. It's more or less clear, but in the branches, it's very rough elements, so to speak, coarse. Dr. Laitman, a person who's in spiritual attainment, looking at fish or whatever it is, he can immediately say, is it kosher, this animal, or not? So if we're saying that food symbolizes some kind of upper abundance, upper light, then these are different forms of connection to the Creator. So there are certain forms that I can allow myself and some that I can't, Dr. Laitman, because they manifest such forms that it is impossible to take it as an intention in order to bestow, use them in order to bestow an intention. Host. So, for example, we can't use pork because we can't use it in order to bestow according to these rules, but eventually it will be possible to use everything at the end of correction. Dr. Laitman, of course, then no problem. Host, but as if there's there's no connection to pork in our world. Then why, Dr. Laitman? We don't understand this, but actually there is a connection. We simply don't see it. Host, what is the blessing before and after food? It's also an important element. Every meal starts and ends with a blessing, with giving thanks, Dr. Laitman. Any taking in of food, it is accompanied by giving thanks, because everything comes from the Creator, everything comes from above down to a person, and a person, when he takes this food or drink in, accordingly, correspondingly, he has to thank the Creator. And then, after that, can he take that food in. And there are many rules in relation to this, customs. We can talk about this separately. But for people that aren't close to this, it doesn't really interest them. Host, but many give thanks before and after. It's traditional. Dr. Laitman, yeah, it's giving thanks for sitting together at a meal, and that soon we will fulfill our desires, our hunger, and therefore we're giving thanks to the Creator, from which everything comes, the sun, water, and everything, thanks to which we can fulfill ourselves, enliven ourselves, support ourselves in life, meaning all of these blessings, they are very serious. Host, on a deeper level, if we look at nature at Creator as nature, then what does it mean to give thanks to nature? Dr. Laitman, it means that you form a correct attitude toward nature, where everything that exists in nature, you do not consider yourself to be a boss over it, but merely a receiver. And here, it is very important that it's not you who's boss over all of this. Host, what's the difference between thanking before and after the meal? Dr. Laitman, before the meal is thanking for the food, and after that you're satiated and that you can keep on going now. Host, it's all very deep and interesting. And you look, there's so many elements, so many things, and I think for an ordinary person, it's better to fast and that's it, because to start keeping these intentions before, after, during the inner work, all these efforts, Dr. Laitman, it's made so on purpose in order to cut a person, not to cut a person off from his thoughts or inner intentions, for him to all the time understand where is he? Why is he built the way that he is, directed at the Creator in that way, etc., etc. So, to the contrary, all these blessings, all these laws, they're only in order to tie a person so that in each action of his, he will all the time feel that he is in the field of the Creator until he starts feeling this field, and then naturally he will implement all these things. So all these efforts, the efforts themselves, they have to give a person pleasure. Dr. Laitman, they have to show a person that with their help, he can all the time come closer to the Creator. Host, and the nearing is what gives the pleasure. Dr. Laitman, yes. Host, otherwise it's terrible if a person doesn't understand what is it all for. Dr. Laitman, no one forces a person to do anything. To the measure to which a person starts to understand the meaning behind it, he chooses the proper level of keeping these rules. So today we have a meal. We'll work on it. Thank you very much for this very deep explanation. And till next time, all the best.